At the beginning of the story, we see a man named Dan sitting comfortably on the couch with his daughter, Mory, watching a football match. Suddenly, something strange happens on the TV. The match is interrupted as a cloud of smoke and lightning appears on the field. Out of the cloud, several soldiers emerge, led by a woman named Lieutenant Hart. She announces that they are from the year 2051, the future. It is revealed that a species of alien called white spikes has attacked Earth, decimating most of the population by 2051. The soldiers have come to request help, asking people to join them in the future to fight this battle. Over the next 12 months, countries around the world send as many soldiers as they can. However, the authorities in the future demand more reinforcements. Of those sent to fight, only a quarter return alive. As trained soldiers run out, governments begin drafting civilians. Dan, a teacher, receives a message while teaching his class, informing him that he has been selected to join the war. To confirm this, he visits a nearby military office, where he is told that he is eligible for the draft because he is predicted to die in 7 years anyway. Shocked, Dan asks several questions, but the officers avoid answering them directly. Instead, they attach a device to his arm to track him and communicate with him in the future. The device cannot be removed until he returns from 2051. That evening, Dan informs his wife, Emmy, who becomes distressed and suggests they should run away from the government. Dan explains that the tracker on his arm makes escaping impossible. The authorities can find them anywhere, even if they travel through time. With no other options, Emmy suggests that Dan seek help from his father, James, a brilliant engineer who distrusts the government and might be able to remove the tracker. James, however, had abandoned their family after returning from the Vietnam War, traumatized by the loss of his comrades. Dan harbors deep resentment toward his father. At home, Dan sees his daughter playing in the garden. He tries to lie, saying he is going on a trip, but Mory immediately understands that he has been drafted into the war. Dan promises her that he will return alive and hugs her lovingly. The next day, Dan and other new recruits undergo weapons and first aid training to improve their survival chances. During the training, Dan befriends an environmental scientist named Charlie and an ex-Navy SEAL named Dorian. While most recruits want to avoid the war, Dorian is about to go for the third time. It is revealed that white spikes disappear for a few days every 6 days to rest. This is when new soldiers are sent to the future, and those on duty are recalled. One evening, while the new recruits are talking, an alarm suddenly goes off. A soldier from 2051 shouts that this is not a drill. Aliens have attacked the last scientific research center of 2051. If the aliens succeed in destroying it, humanity will lose the war. The recruits rush to the portal room. Dan asks Lieutenant Hart what is happening, and she gravely explains the situation. Moments later, the recruits are pulled into the portal one by one. However, an error in the landing coordinates causes Dan and others to teleport hundreds of feet above the ground, resulting in many casualties. Fortunately, Dan, Charlie, and Dorian land in a swimming pool on the roof of a tall building, escaping with minor injuries. Dan quickly exits the pool, checks his weapon, and looks at the ruined city of Miami from the rooftop. Meanwhile, the military investigates the time jump error. The chief command contacts the survivors, informing them that an airstrike will soon target the area due to the high number of white spikes. Dan is appointed leader of the group and tasked with rescuing the scientists trapped in the building. He agrees to the mission and gathers the remaining recruits. The group cautiously enters the building, warned by the command to stay alert, as white spikes can detect the scent of blood from afar. They find the scientists, but they are all dead. The team is ordered to retrieve hard drives and biological samples from the lab, which contain crucial information about the aliens. Dan finds the samples, but the team learns that fighter jets will bomb the area in 6 minutes. They rush to the emergency stairs, but are ambushed by white spikes. Dan fights one off, but Dorian helps, explaining that only shots to the neck or stomach can kill them. The team narrowly escapes to rescue vehicles sent by the military, but 3 white spikes attack the vehicles, killing many team members. The airstrike begins, and only 7 members of the team survive. 2 soldiers sacrifice themselves to hold off the aliens, allowing the others to escape in time. The next day, Dan wakes up at a military base with Charlie and Dorian, who informs him that they are the only 3 survivors. Dan notices a white spike claw around Dorian's neck and asks about it. Dorian explains that he has 6 months to live due to cancer, discovered during his first draft. He keeps returning to the war because he would rather die fighting for humanity than in a hospital bed. Later, Dan is summoned by the head of the command. To his surprise, the commander is his grown-up daughter, Colonel Mory Foster. Mory explains that she brought him here for a specific mission, which she will reveal at the right time. She shows him a military tent, where she explains that they have developed a toxic serum that kills male white spikes. However, they need a female alien to create a toxin effective against both genders. While flying to a white spike nest, Mory explains that the aliens appeared suddenly on Earth, emerging from northern Russia and spreading worldwide. Despite thorough investigations, no crashed spaceship or evidence of their arrival has been found. Changing the subject, Dan asks what happened to their family between 2022 and 2051. Mory avoids answering. They arrive at the nest, where soldiers attempt to capture a female white spike in a cage. Everything seems under control until the aliens launch an attack to rescue her. Dan, who was in the helicopter, noticed a group of male white spikes heading toward the nest. He and Mory quickly got off the helicopter and managed to lock the female in a cage. As the helicopter lifted off with the cage, the swarm of male white spikes arrived. This forced the father and daughter to flee in a military jeep, using the mounted machine gun to clear their path. After some time, they reached a beach. Mory was furious because Dan had recklessly risked his life during the fight. She expressed her desperation to keep him alive at any cost. In her anger, Mory began explaining what had happened to their family over the years. She revealed that after returning from the war, Dan became deeply disillusioned with life. He divorced his wife, Emmy, and chose to live alone. On Mory's 16th birthday, she received a call that shattered her world. Dan had died in an accident. Hearing this, Dan was devastated, unable to believe that he had turned out just like his father, abandoning his family. They returned to the military base, where Mory immediately began working on creating the toxin to kill the aliens. She had to run thousands of tests to prepare a toxin effective against the female white spike, and she was determined to complete the task before Dan's time in the future ran out. Only 21 hours remained. The next morning, Dan asked Mory how they would kill all the aliens even if the toxin succeeded. Mory explained that Dan would need to take the toxin back to his time and mass-produce it so that they could eliminate the aliens before the war began. While they were discussing this, the computer signaled 100% bond completion, indicating that the toxin was ready. Unfortunately, at that moment, the female white spike woke up and began screeching loudly. Within seconds, white spikes began storming the base. Dan and Mory grabbed their weapons and ran toward the helipad, encountering numerous monsters along the way. Over the speakers, they heard an announcement that the time jumpers had only 3 minutes left. Mory handed Dan the toxin and urged him to run. However, before he could escape, another alien appeared, and as it attacked, the ground beneath them collapsed due to the weight. As Mory and the alien fell, Dan jumped in to save her. But before he could reach her, he was pulled back to his own time, 2022. When Dan regained consciousness, he realized he was holding the vial of toxin in his hand. He explained to Lieutenant Hart that they needed to mass-produce the toxin and send it to the future. But Hart informed him that the time portal had been completely destroyed on the other side, making future travel impossible. Hearing this, Dan returned home, devastated. He hugged his daughter tightly, and later that night, he shared with Emmy what had happened in the future, including his conversations with Mory. He also mentioned that no one knew where the white spikes had come from, as they had simply appeared in 2048. Emmy suggested that perhaps the creatures had arrived from space centuries ago, sparking an idea in Dan's mind. Dan met Dorian at a bar and shared his thoughts. They decided to prevent the war before it began. With Dorian's white spike claw in hand, they approached Charlie, an environmental scientist, to analyze it. Charlie discovered volcanic ash from China on the claw, which surprised everyone because the white spikes were first spotted in northern Russia, far from China. This reminded Dan of a student in his class, Martin, who had an intense interest in volcanoes. Martin explained that a massive volcanic eruption thousands of years ago had spread ash as far as northern Russia's glaciers. This revelation led them to conclude that the white spikes had likely arrived thousands of years ago and had been dormant under the ice. Global warming must have caused the ice to melt by 2048, waking the aliens. Armed with this information, they approached the U.S. government for funding to stop the threat. However, the government declined due to the political tension between the U.S. and Russia. Out of options, Dan turned to his father, James, who had access to unregistered airplanes. James agreed to join the mission immediately. Lieutenant Hart also arrived with newly developed toxic injections capable of eradicating the aliens. After hours of flying, they reached a location where all electronic devices stopped working. Using explosives, they drilled into the ground and cautiously descended into the ice. There, they found a frozen alien spacecraft. Cutting through the ice, they entered the spaceship. While Charlie and James stayed outside to prevent any aliens from escaping, Dan's team explored the craft. They discovered pods containing the white spikes, concluding that the creatures had been bioengineered by an intelligent alien race, possibly as weapons to conquer other planets. The team began injecting the pods with the toxin, which caused the white spikes to writhe in pain. However, their cries awakened other aliens that had not yet been injected. These creatures broke free and attacked the team. Dan and his team fought back, but some aliens managed to escape. Dorian suggested that the only solution was to destroy the entire spaceship. They activated the bomb, but before they could escape, they were attacked. Only Dan, Charlie, and James managed to get out before the bomb detonated. The explosion killed all the aliens in the spaceship, but one female with a red belly remained alive. This Queen White Spike was crucial to destroy, as she could reproduce and restart the invasion. To trap her, Dan crafted a snowman, dressing it in a jacket to resemble a human. The queen fell for the trap, and as she approached, Dan and James fired at her, driving her toward the edge of a cliff. They planned to push her off, but she fought back fiercely, separating the two. The queen threw a spike at Dan, but he used it to attack her instead. James then struck her in the eye with an axe, blinding her. Taking advantage of the moment, Dan injected her with the toxin. However, the clever alien severed her own leg to prevent the toxin from spreading. In a final act of bravery, James lured the queen toward him by exposing his bleeding hand. Dan refused to let his father die and leaped onto the queen, slashing her throat with Dorian's claw. He then injected the toxin directly into her mouth and pushed her off the cliff. The fall crushed her completely. The next day, news reports of explosions in Russia revealed that many aliens had been killed. Governments worldwide began taking credit for the mission. Dan returned home to his family, choosing to reconcile with his father and live happily together, leaving behind all bitterness. Do like and share this video, and do not forget to subscribe this channel for more such movie recap.